Mark Rogers TV going to the Pac-12 to talk USC football with the Trojans on a Friday night endeavor out to Utah to take on the undefeated Utes. We bring in Nick Dempsey from Conquest Chronicles to talk up the Trojans, and it's difficult to talk them up these days, considering the Alabama and Stanford efforts with a Utah State win sandwiched in there, and another difficult date with the Utah Utes. So we've got news at quarterback, Nick. We've got a quarterback change.
Yeah, Helton made the decision earlier in this week, the week after reviewing both quarterbacks for 3 games. He thought bringing in Sam Darnold would bring a little bit of a spark to the offense. I don't know if that's true, but it's not working with Max Brown. They weren't getting the ball into the end zone when they were playing Stanford and Alabama. Not a whole lot of reason to think that'll magically change against Utah, so he made the switch. I will say this for Darnold, he's far more mobile, so if the line is having problems with the pass rush, which is not entirely unexpected for this matchup, maybe Darnold could move the pocket, maybe he could do a little run-pass option to slow him up. They have a little bit more options with Darnold against a heavy pass rush. I think that's what the hope is. Because Max Brown is not very mobile, but their problems on offense are not on Max Brown.
So let's start with the problems on offense, Nick, because you leave us right there. So they scored 10 points against Stanford. They scored 6 against Alabama. So if there are issues on either side of the ball, it's either got to be the talent is deficient. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It has to be a lack of effort. It has to be coaching issues, not coming up with a scheme or a plan that's going to work against the other team. It has to be something or a combination. So what are your indications through 2 poor performances against quality competition?
Well, it's certainly not lack of talent. There's 5-star players all over that field. And I don't think it's lack of effort. I think those kids are fighting very hard. I think they don't have an identity on offense. They don't have an offensive scheme. If you go out and if you were to ask me right now what style of offenses USC runs, I don't know. They don't really have a scheme. The closest they've come to identifying it is T. Martin has referred to it as gumbo, where they just do a little bit of everything, which leads me to believe like this is some sort of weird grab bag where they're just kind of drawing up plays in the dirt before each possession. So they don't have a system. They don't have an identity. Nobody's communicating. I don't think they really are with it. I think they're still just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. And by them, I mean the offensive coaching staff. You'll get Clay Helton come out and answer press questions, wondering why Juju Smith-Schuster isn't involved more in the game. And he'll say, oh, we're targeting him all the time. But then you go in and you look at the numbers, and it's just not the case. They're just not throwing to him. He's barely targeted. So it's sort of the reverse of last year where he was the target of every pass, and now they're just not throwing it to him. And then T. Martin will answer press questions, and he'll say things that are kind of shocking to think about. And he'll say things like, we had no idea the Alabama defense was going to double team Juju Smith-Schuster. We just had no way of knowing that. Like, really? The guy is an All-American everything. He was on every single watch list for everything a wide receiver could be on. Guaranteed one of the best wide receivers in the country in the preseason, arguably the best. You didn't think Nick Saban and the gang were just going to come up with something to stop him? You didn't think David Shaw and Stanford was going to do that? Like, this is shot. You had no way of knowing that. I could have told you that for a heck of a lot cheaper than they're paying those guys, I can promise you. So because they have no system, because they have no default, when things start to go wrong or the crowd noise gets loud or the defense starts yelling out signals, these guys aren't communicating. They don't have any default to go to. And you saw that against Stanford. They had some good drives, but then they would get false start penalties. They'd get offsides. They'd get bumped back to 3rd and long, and they couldn't convert. And Stanford just does what Stanford does. They shorten the game, take possessions away from you, and they went 0 for 4 on 3rd downs in the first half against Stanford. And that was pretty much what did them in. But they're not. No one's on the same page on this offense. You can kind of see the defense is starting to have an identity. We know Clancy Pendergrass on defense is looking to do. They made a few mistakes for their part against Stanford for sure, but not like the offense. it just doesn't seem like anybody's running the ship out there on offense. And, someone's got to step up. T. Martin's never been an offensive coordinator before. Clay Helton before this time last year, 10 months ago, 8 months ago, had never been a head coach before. So they're learning on the job, and it seems like they're learning very slowly at a place where they have a very, very short amount of time to get up to speed, because it's not a very forgiving fan base. So they've got to get it together on offense, and if they don't, it's going to be a very long season. If we keep seeing an offense that's as disjointed and disorganized as we saw against Stanford and certainly against Alabama, this team's probably not going to make a bowl game, quite honestly. I don't see, and I absolutely don't think they'll win in November. So, they've got to get it together on offense, and I guess their hope is that bringing in Darnold is going to do that.
Well, maybe the thought process with Darnold, in addition to salvaging what they can for this season, is that they get him ready for down the road. In terms of an identity, that's a term that you brought up, and most successful offenses, defenses, you can even go outside of football, but specifically in football, it's an identity-based system, program. Successful ones are. Players need to know, what do we do well? What is our identity? What is kind of our core, our values when it comes to playing football? I thought for this USC offense, it was going to be leaning on one of the better offensive lines in the country and utilizing a stable of running backs to set up play action to the big receivers, Jackson and Smith, Schuster, Smith, downfield. That's what I thought the identity of this offense was. You mentioned to me earlier, Nick, that when they do have successful plays on offense, this is another tenet of offensive football, is that you make the defense show that they can shut down a specific play. So as long as that play is successful, go back to it. You don't need to get fancy and try to out-trick them or out-scheme them if your talent is getting the job done.
You're 100% right. And against Stanford, they would break off a couple of good runs. They would attack Stanford's kind of shaky linebacker situation right now, and then they'd move away from it. Or they'd have the tight end slip out and get wide open and make a big play, and then they would just stop throwing to him. I don't know. Like you look on the other side of the field and David Shaw. 95% of the time, are you at all confused or wondering what David Shaw is going to dial up next on offense? No, not really. They're either going to do something crazy with McCaffrey, or they're going to do something simple with McCaffrey. That's it, and they march it right down your throat and they win. But what is it? I can't tell you what go-to play USC has. Like if it's 3rd and 4 and they have to get it, what do? I don't even think they know. I think they're just kind of making it up as they go along. And it's not just the offense. I think it's Clay Helton in general. They had one extra point attempt that Stanford was attempting. They had 8 guys on the field, 8 versus 11. Fortunately for them, David Shaw didn't dial up anything or say, "Hey, just fake it and go for 2 because you got 11 on 8. You should hopefully win that." So they didn't have that. They don't. Late in the 4th quarter, Clay Helton all week leading up to the game and still after the Stanford game and all of his press conferences has said, we knew Stanford was going to shorten the game, take away our possessions, limit them. It's what they do. You might even say it's their identity. But then he made the curious decision, down 3 touchdowns in the 4th quarter, knowing he doesn't get a lot of possessions. He was around midfield. He decides to punt it rather than go for it. And then when they interviewed him in the postgame and the days after, he said, no, that was absolutely the right decision. I wanted to pin him deep and get back on defense. Down by 3 touchdowns. I think they might have touched the ball one more time the rest of the game. They did not score on said possession. Not that it would have mattered. So it's just a lot of these little things that, well, actually not even that little. That's pretty glaring. But it's just all of these things are kind of adding up, and all of the talent in the world can't seem to overcome any of that. And I just think it's a lot of disorganization. I think it's a lot of just sort of Bush League amateurism. I don't know how else to describe it. Like, this is, you look at what Clay Helton has done as a head coach, and I'm not even saying compare him to David Shaw, just compare him to literally any other Pac-12 coach. And I don't even think it's close. I think they're probably the worst coach team in the conference right now. and that's bad news for them. That's really bad news for them.
USC and Stanford win the game. That's the sole purpose. This is what bothers me about punting in the fourth quarter. I see this all the time with coaches. I don't know if they think that it looks better if you lose by 17 points rather than 24 or 31 points, but the purpose is to win the game. And the only way you can win the game is to retain the football and move it and score, not give it up when especially when the other team, Stanford, and like you say, they deflate the air out of the ball and you're not going to get the ball back enough to score. Your only chance is to take risks at that point and keep the football and score.
Yeah, and what's even more perplexing is we saw last year Clay Helton went for it on fourth down a lot. When I think a lot of coaches would have taken the easy 3 points, he would go for it. And so for him to punt there and then defend the choice, if he would have come out on Monday or Tuesday and be like, you know what, I think I just made the wrong call there. I'm getting better just like everybody else. I think that would have been okay. But to then go out and continuously defend that choice, I don't know if he's just not good at math or what the deal is. Like, you need points. You need scores. You're not going to do that playing defense on Christian McCaffrey or Michael Rector, both of whom broke out big plays in that game for scores anyway. So he's learning on the job, and USC is just not the place to do that.
At least in their preparation for Utah, they're going to face a very similar team. Maybe not quite as good or quite as talented, but close and schematically a very similar team. And in terms of identities, both offensively and defensively, very similar team that puts it on the front four to stop you on defense, the very strong defensive line play. Offensively, not a dynamic passing game, want to run the ball, establish the run, keep possession of the ball, first-year quarterback, don't want to take a whole lot of chances. It's a very similar team that they're going to face in Utah than they just faced in Stanford. So hopefully they can learn something if they're better coaches than maybe we're giving them credit to be right now.
The crazy thing is that he comes out and says schematically all the right things. We know they're good at this, so we have to do that. We know he's already come out and said, we know Utah is insanely good at pressuring the quarterback, which I believe is probably why instead of waiting for maybe the bye week to make the quarterback switch, he's bringing in the mobile quarterback now. But he said that against Stanford. He said all these things. We know what they're good at. We know what they're going to do. We're going to have to do this to counteract it. And then those things don't happen. So we know Utah has an amazing pass rush. We know they're going to bring 5 or 6 guys. We know they have a solid secondary that even if you do get the ball in the air, can really take it away from you. But whether or not they do anything to adjust for that, get everybody on the same page, or at least just not have as many penalties, that's tough to say. But again, we know what Utah's doing. We knew what Stanford's doing. Whether or not they can actually stop it, that's the question. But they've got to pick up the blitz. This offensive line has got to have their best game of the season by far. They've got to be able to pick up that blitz. They've got to get the running game moving. You can't have this all fall on a redshirt freshman in his first starting game on the road in a very loud stadium. Utah is notoriously rowdy, that crowd. And it's probably going to rain by all indications. So you've got to get the run game going. You've got to help your quarterback out somehow. The last quarterback you had just got benched. You're running out of guys here. But can they do that? I don't know. The good news is the defense is pretty sharp for USC, and Utah has had a serious problem with turnovers so far this season. So if they're going to have a chance, they're going to have to get some extra possessions and set up good field position for USC to get some points.
Troy Williams is hitting on 63% of his passes, 4 touchdowns, the aforementioned turnovers, 4 interceptions for him. Joe Williams was the guy that they turned to late last season in replacing Devontae Booker, and Williams showed us quite a bit in late 2015, but he's had fumbling issues. That's been the other turnover issue, so they've replaced him most notably with Troy McCormick and also Zach Moss at over 6 yards per carry. Got to consider the competition. Utah's had 2 inferior foes along with a 1-point win when BYU elected to go for 2 at the gun. Tim Patrick would be the kid to look out for as a wide receiver threat. He's got all 4 touchdown receptions, Nick, 20 yards per reception, 14 catches So obviously, hopefully, USC is not going to take on the thoughts that opposing coaches supposedly have in not knowing who that kid is for Utah, because the stat sheet tell us that he may get a few targets in this game.
Yeah, I feel like even if the coaches didn't, Adoree Jackson would probably just go over to his side of the field anyway, because sometimes it feels like he's the only guy like maxing out on every play. But yeah, I think the other thing is, had you talked to me about a month ago and said USC could very seriously start off the season 1-3, I would think, okay, that's possible, and probably not the worst thing in the world given who their schedule is in September. And where they're playing all these games. They've had one home game that was against Utah State. Everything else has been away from the Coliseum. So, 2-2 probably would have been like the ideal, most realistic scenario, but it's the way they've lost their first two games, I think, that makes this an absolute must-win game for USC, or at least a must-compete. If they go out and fight hard and maybe they lose late, there's something there to kind of hang your hat on and say, okay, we are better than what we've looked. We're getting better. Because their schedule softens up a little bit in October, but then their November is probably even more brutal than their September, because they've got Oregon, Washington, UCLA, Notre Dame in the month of November. If the team that shows up against Alabama and Stanford is the same USC team that heads in November, that's an easy 0-4. So that's already 6 losses, which means this Utah game and all of the October games, they'd have to win just to make a bowl game. So if this isn't a must-win, it's an absolutely must-show significant progress game. Otherwise, maybe it's time to start really, really hitting the panic button on how bad this season's going to get. So, no pressure, Sam Darnold, but enjoy your first start, buddy.
And no pressure, Clay Helton.
Yeah.
That's who should really be feeling the pressure at this point. The last time USC started 1-2 was 2001. That was the first season of Pete Carroll, and that turned out okay. I don't know the last time they started out at 1-3, and that's probably what they're looking at, although they can certainly beat Utah. They have the talent to do it. Utah's not a world beater. It's a good football team. It's a top 25 team. This should be a really good game on Friday night, but it's on the road. And it's a team that's going to be prepared, we know, with Kyle Whittingham on the sideline. They will be prepared and fundamentally sound to take on USC's best in this one. Nick Dempsey from Conquest Chronicles setting us up for USC and Utah on Friday night. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Of course, Mark, anytime.